Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm Liza Lawrence. I'm glad to have you join me as we celebrate wonders and miracles together. All right, well, I'm here with Kylie today from Utah, and she had a miracle experience when she was serving a mission for her church back in March of 2019, so a year ago. While she was on her mission, she had a stroke, which is highly unusual for a young girl. And she's going to tell us all the details and the miracles that she saw during this time in her life. So, Kylie, thank you so much for being on the show, and tell us what happened.
Yeah, so I was on my mission. It was just like any other day. As a missionary, you have a very tight schedule. Like every moment of the day, you're doing something, whether that's just normal everyday stuff or whether it's out going and talking to people and meeting new people. So one morning, the morning of March 23rd, it was just like any other morning. I got up at 6:30 a.m. and started to get ready for the day, but I started the day with exercising. So I went through my exercises and then I started to jump rope, which was something that I love to do because I could really get my energy going, because we couldn't really go out on the streets and exercise. We kind of just had to stay in the apartment. So that was what I was doing. And then something happened. My head just began to hurt like nothing else I had ever felt in my life. Kind of like when you get a cut or a scrape, like you feel all the blood rushing there. That's kind of what it felt like. And then times that 1,000 more. So I didn't really know what was happening, but I just went and laid down and I couldn't process anything. My vision started going in and out. The only thing I could do was exclaim, "Help me, help me, help me, help me," to one of my companions at the time, which is a person that I was assigned to be with. And so I was with her and I just kept saying, help me over and over, because there was nothing else I could say. So they got a hold of some of the senior missionaries, which are missionaries that are older. They took me to the hospital and nobody knew what was going on at that point. They just thought that I was severely dehydrated because I was serving my mission in the Philippines, which is an extremely hot place. And it was also in March, which is summer. So it's like the peak of the heat. So they began to do different tests and things. They still didn't know what was wrong. But at that point, they realized it wasn't dehydration. So I had to sign a paper to be cleared. And I couldn't find the bottom of the paper. Like I was trying to sign off the paper, which didn't exist. And at that point, they're like, okay, maybe we should do a CT scan. We don't think anything's wrong, but we're not going to rule it out. And so that's what they did. The second they got the scan, these senior missionaries that took me, so they knew exactly what it was. What's called an AVM, arteriovenous malformation, which is an abnormal connection between like the arteries and the veins, and it can be in your brain or in your spine or other places in your body. So when they saw that, that was probably one of the first little miracles and tender mercies that happened, because one of them had worked with stroke patients, and another one, her dad had the exact same thing happen to him 5 years previous. He had an AVM, which is crazy because it's really rare. Less than 1% of people have it happen to them. And if you have an AVM, sometimes like you don't know it's there. It's something I was born with, but you don't know it's there until it just kind of like a balloon, until it pops. Some people live their whole lives with it and they don't know. If it starts bleeding, that's when you know.
Do they think it was the pressure of jump roping that made it burst?
It might be partially because generally if you're like more active in your life, which I grew up playing almost every sport, so that's probably what did call. And then when you're on a mission, it's also go, go, go. You have a certain time even to eat. You have a certain time for everything. So there's not really time to relax. So yeah, there I was, like halfway through my mission and a million miles from home, which was also crazy because my parents weren't there. And they told me that I was going to need brain surgery, a life-saving surgery, because my brain was like bleeding rapidly. And if they didn't do anything, then I probably would not live. Wasn't really processing anything at that moment. So I just asked, can I finish my mission? And
A typical mission is about 18 months, right? And you were how old at this time? 19?
yes.
So you were hoping they didn't send you home, that you'd be able to finish the next 8 months of your mission.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny because a day or two earlier, I said to one of my companions, I said, oh, like I finally get this language, because I was also learning a different language, Tagalog, which is a very, very hard language to learn. And I said to her, oh, like I finally think I get this. I finally feel like I'm kind of adopted to the language, the culture, and like I'm just ready for this next 9 months. And then the next day did not go at like I expected. It was pretty crazy. Right after I got the CT scan, I was able to receive a blessing. And in that blessing, it mentioned that I would survive and recover and be able to complete my mission, which at that point was really crazy, because while like all of that was happening, a nurse came up to them. This nurse noticed their name tags, because as missionaries we wear name tags. So she knows them, and she mentioned that she was a member of our church. And she told us that she had been prompted from where she was working in the hospital that she needed to go to the ER. So she did. And she asked if there's anything she could do to help. And the ambulances there are kind of crazy, because I went to a hospital where they didn't have any neuro facilities. So they couldn't really take care of me or do anything. So they told her that something that she could do is ride an ambulance, because they don't have specific people assigned to be an ambulance. And one of the doctors drove the ambulance.
Holy cow.
So they just offered to drive. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. So her shift was actually just getting off too, which is crazy. She had crazy shifts that whole week. So there's no other way other than a miracle that she was able.
That's amazing to get that prompting. Yeah, to have this nurse just show up and to have her be a member of your own faith is pretty miraculous too.
Yeah. And so then I just got in the ambulance. And for those of you who are also not familiar with the Philippines, it has one of the top worst traffic in the world. So that was kind of crazy too, riding in the ambulance. And I remember feeling like super scared, because I couldn't feel my legs, and like everything just like happened so fast, and I was just like so confused. And just having her there was such a big blessing, and like comforted me so much. It took us about 20 minutes to get to the other hospital, which is also a miracle, because it should have taken way longer because we were in traffic. When I got to the hospital, I think I fell asleep or blacked out after that. And so, but when I woke up in the ICU of the other hospital, I just remember feeling so much peace and so much hope, even though I didn't know all of the things that had happened. I just knew that whatever was going to happen, I was going to be okay. It was just amazing to feel that after feeling so much like stress and being worried. I definitely feel like that peace came from heaven, just knowing that there's someone that knew what I was going through and knew what was going to happen, and just knew the pain that I was in, both like physically and just from the stress and from my parents not being there and everything like that. At that point, they were communicating with the doctors in the Philippines and the doctors in the US, trying to figure out what was the best thing to do. And so they wanted me to fly home to get the surgery done at home. But the chance of me having another stroke or my brain increasing in the bleeding was really high. And so they decided that they were going to do it right there in the Philippines. And it's actually one of the top 5 hospitals in the world for like taking care of that specific condition I had. And the doctors were very well trained and might have even done a better job than they would have in the US, and so I really feel like I was meant to go to that certain place at that time, that it happened at that stage of my life where I was on my mission. Even though I didn't want to leave my mission, it wasn't while I was in school. I didn't have to stop school. I didn't have to stop a job. The timing was just so perfect. That was definitely a blessing from heaven. throughout the rest of that, I received other blessings. I got one from someone by the name of Elder Wakolo, who is one of the leaders in our church. And he was serving over the Philippines area, the whole Philippines area. That was another big blessing as well, a tender mercy, because he was one of the people who had influenced me to go on a mission based off of one of his talks that he gave in our church. And he also came to our little mission area. It was called the Mission Tour, and he talked there a few months previous. So even though I didn't have a close relationship with him, just knowing who he was and helped me a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like your paths were meant to cross, that
Yes.
He had influenced you before. You were sent to his area. He was there to give you a blessing. That's amazing. I love those little not coincidences.
Yeah. So after he came on March 27th is when I had the surgery. It took about 4 hours, which was a little longer than they expected, but they were able to remove all the things that they needed to. There really were a million things that could have gone wrong, but none of them did. That was a huge blessing. Right when I woke up, my mom was there. They had asked me if I wanted to wait for them to have my mom to come to have the surgery, or if I wanted to have the surgery done with, and I wanted it done sooner than later. But she was actually in Hawaii for my siblings' senior trip when it all happened, and they didn't get the call because their phones were off. But my mom had a feeling to pray hard, and she was like, "Why? I'm in Hawaii. Everything's good." But she's like, "Okay, I need to pray hard," and so she did, and it's crazy all the ways she was able to get home, get everything she needed, and get there and be there when I woke up to comfort me and help me. That was another huge blessing. She was able to help me a lot, getting the nurses, making sure I was eating enough, all the little things that would have been hard if I didn't have an additional person there to help me with. We also had a visit from this incredible Filipino woman. We were obviously contacting the rest of my family, so grandparents and extended family, so they would know what was happening. My grandma had someone that worked in her house who was Filipino, and my grandma told her about me, what was happening, and her niece was actually just a few miles of the hospital that I was in. So she wanted to come and see if I was okay. So she came and brought this huge fruit basket, gave us her phone number, and just offered to help in any way that she could. That was also a really cool miracle because my grandparents had just recently moved there. They lived in Idaho, and someone from Idaho knew someone who was just 5 to 10 minutes away from where I was at. Then when I went home, I was eventually able to meet her aunt and develop a relationship with them and get to know them. I'm still really good friends with them because of this experience that happened to me. Of course, too, throughout all of this, I had some setbacks too, because even though I was able to recover and there wasn't any major side effects, I wasn't able to see out of my peripheral vision. My balance was super off. Things like reading were hard. But as I came home, because of when it happened in my life at 19 years old, it's helped me to be able to recover a lot faster. Still not 100%, but it's such a gift to be where I'm at today, to be able to go to school, to be able to meet goals that I have in life despite what happened. So after a couple of weeks, I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I was able to leave the hospital and walk, even though it was very off balance. I could, and that was a big tender mercy for me to be able to do that. I went and stayed at an apartment that some previous missionaries that went home had just moved out of, and it wasn't expected to have new ones fill it for a few more weeks. So just the vacancy of them being gone at a perfect timing was also a miracle, because I wasn't able to fly home yet because I still had to rest and kind of gain a little bit more strength before I could fly back home.
Did your mom stay with you this whole time? Was she there with you in the apartment?
Yes, she stayed with me, because as a missionary, you're always supposed to be with someone pretty much 24/7. Even though all this had happened to me, I was still a missionary. One of the things I also did was go to physical therapy to kind of help with my balance. Like I mentioned previously, the exercising actually like really helps, because if I wouldn't have been exercising every day, I probably would have had to regain a lot more strength. And so the physical therapist that I went to, I would meet with her a couple times a week. She was really friendly. She, of course, would talk to me in Tagalog, which that's another blessing, is that I didn't forget any of the Tagalog. Even though I had all that happen to my head, I could still remember Tagalog.
I was going to ask you that, because that is amazing. So it didn't affect your language centers at all?
Yeah, not really. Well, it kind of affected my processing a little bit. Like I said before, like I could just only say, help me, help me. And sometimes I still struggle like processing things and finding the words to explain it. But as far as the Tagalog went, I still remembered. So I got the chance to really get to know her, and she asked me a lot of questions about my faith and what I believed. The physical therapy sessions usually lasted hours longer than they were supposed to, because she just wanted to know so much. And it was really special for me, because being a missionary was such a special experience for me. And I knew that I was probably going to have to go home, and that I wasn't going to be able to do that anymore. So just the fact that I could still be doing that in the last few days was really special. So over the next few days, I had my 29 staples out of my head, and then I was cleared to go home. It was really cool, the timing of when I left, because I left on April 19th, which was like a few days before Easter, and it was around Passover week in the Philippines. And a lot of people are Catholic and celebrate the importance of Passover, and they really celebrated the importance of family. And at that time, everything kind of just shuts down and goes calm. Like even the malls, they have huge, giant malls, and they're even open on Christmas. But at Easter time, they're not, because they believe that everyone needs to go back to their province, which a province means like where you were born. And so everyone was just going home to be with their families. So when I drove to the airport, there was no people on the roads, because everyone was just like with their families. It was really cool, because I was also able to do that, to go home, to be with my family and go back to my province. Obviously, the reason we celebrate Easter is because of Jesus Christ and his resurrection and new life. And in some ways, I like to think that I got to live again. So I made it home and spent time with my family over the next 3 months. I slept a lot and tried to recover, but I wanted to really push myself, because I knew what I wanted to do was go back on my mission. And in my mind, that was the most important thing at that moment. Long story short, I was able to go back 3 months later. It was a miracle that short of a time, especially based on what happened, and that I was allowed to go back to the Philippines instead of somewhere closer to home. It was really, really a big blessing to go back to a place that like held some very, very traumatic experiences, but also a place that held so many miraculous experiences. And it's just cool to have a place like that. And I definitely know that God knows each of us, and that he has a plan for each of us. So when things happen to us, even though it might make us a little different than who we were before them, those differences are okay, and they make us who we are, and they just make us stronger.
I love that, and I agree with that. Thank you. What are some of the permanent changes that you saw when, you talk about differences? Are there things that you have to deal with now differently than before?
Well, a lot of this kind of side effects, I guess you'd call them, have slowly been going away. Some of them were peripheral vision, and I just couldn't read. And actually in that 3 months, I set this goal to read this really long book. I think it was 300 or 400 pages. But I set this goal that I was going to read this book to learn those words. And by the end of that book, I was able to mostly read normally. Sometimes I have a hard time with like longer words. And sometimes now I still struggle with numbers. I just process a lot slower than I used to, but nothing really that you can see from like the outside. And I also kind of just jump around a lot more. Mm-hmm. It's harder to just like linear process. I kind of just like do random stuff.
But. Interesting. And I'm not familiar with this condition, but are you prone for this to happen again, or once it's sealed, you're clear?
They have said that if you have the chances of one AVM, because you can have it anywhere in your body, but they're most common in the brain and like the spinal cords. So they said that if you have one, the chances of you having another one and then somewhere else is like really high. And so I was like screened elsewhere and I didn't, but they have said that it can come back, but the chances are really, really low. But it is a possibility. They said to come back in like 5 years to like get screened or something like that. But yeah.
The thing I love is it feels like there was divine timing to everything that took place and divine orchestration in the people that were present for you that you needed at that time. I love kind of seeing that big picture of how the Lord orchestrates everything for our good, even if this experience didn't feel like it was a good thing, but everything fell into place.
Yeah, there's a lot of more people that stuff happened to. Another like miracle of like me actually being alive is when they were trying to figure out what was happening, like what kind of stroke it was, because there's a difference, which obviously I didn't know that before, but now I know that there's like the one from heat stroke, which is kind of what they thought I had, and then there's like the hemorrhage stroke, which is what I did have. And they were going to give me the medicine for the heat stroke, which would have been deadly because the effects they have. So just because the doctors had like patience, and the doctors were even praying, even though they didn't have the same faith as I did, they were praying to know what to do, and then they gave me the right medicine.
How do you know they were praying? Because you don't normally think that with medical personnel, that they would pray for insight in a patient.
Well, when I talked to them, because when I had to go to follow-up appointments after, they like told me that they were praying. And like in the Philippines, pretty much everyone's religious of some background, and they're very open to sharing. Like maybe in the U.S., like we're a little bit more like kind of keeping it to ourselves, but they'll share it. If they have something to share, they'll share it.
I love that. I wish we were more like that.
Yeah.
Because I do know that there are a lot of good spiritual doctors that pray over their patients, but to have them share that with a patient, I think is awesome. To say we were praying to know what to do. That's cool. And they gave you the correct help. It sounds like they were guided.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I love all the little miracles that helped support you through this experience. And the fact that you're here on the earth still is kind of a grand miracle, the big miracle. So anything else you wanted to say or anything you learned specifically from this?
Yeah, kind of like what you said, that God's timing like really is so perfect. Like even though sometimes we might not see it, like as we reflect and look back on it, that we really can see that he knows us and he loves us all so much. Like kind of the whole thing, when life throws you lemons, make lemonade. We're going to all have crazy stuff happen to us. It's up to us to have faith and choose how to react.
Yes, I agree. And I think that's beautiful and amazing. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this miracle story. Please subscribe to my channel if you like